Kia ora koutou, good morning everyone. Thank you for being here. We have a Stockwater race closure hearing, and just to give a wee bit of background, a report came to Council to our last term of Council on the 5th of October, and a decision was unable to be made, so it was recommended that we went to a hearing. Today we have the applicant, Alistair Morrison, who will come up and speak, and then we have other presenters who both support and oppose the closure, who will speak as well, and then we have the applicant's right of reply. After that we will go into deliberations, and then we'll hear our staff report. And we have got in front of us the maps, we've got all the applicants' form and also the survey forms, which councillors have all read. I am going to set my timer. Each speaker has 10 minutes to speak, and that includes any questions from the panel, and those questions are just for clarification only. We can ask questions of the staff when we go into deliberations. So thank you. Will Alistair come on up? And this has been live streamed today as well, and you just need to press, yep, good eye.
Welcome everybody. I've got this submission in to close this water race at Anima. I think you've all got a map there in front of you. My opinion is that water races were very good in their day, and not many people need them anymore, and the whole network has become run down. Even the maps are out of date. I just had a quick look at my rates bill for 2021. We were paying 4,400 for 4,400 metres of water race. Last year's rates bill there was only 831, so somewhere in between. That's right. So the maps are completely out of date and need to be upgraded, and I think the whole system's got run down. Part of the submission says that there's no firefighting options available if the water race is closed down. Well, there's plenty of water in Anima, it's just a matter of finding it. There's the Craycroft main that runs through one of the farms. There's a silver stream drain that people seem to have forgotten about. I talked to one of the occupiers of the land and said that silver stream drain hadn't actually gone dry in his lifetime. There's two rivers available, there's a drainage network available, and there's the RDR not too far away, so there's plenty of places to get firefighting water if it's needed. There are cost-effective options available if there is a will to use them. These are, you can dig a shallow well with a digger and use a gallery. There's water available from the RDR siphon. I've talked to Mel Brooks yesterday about that, and there is a possibility of up to 10 litres of water available from the RDR siphon. That is under pressure as well. The only downside to that every 3 years it gets shut off, so there needs to be an alternative supply. There are house wells available. You could pump from the Craycroft main. There's another supply of water, and then, as I say, the silver stream drain, which is a constant source of water. The economic values, the estimated value of the land taken up by the water race on our farm alone, if they use the 5 metre setback that the new rules come in, there's over $50,000 worth of land taken up in that water race. Okay, to put it another way, if I grow 12 tonne of crop of wheat at today's prices, the area taken up in that water race, you could actually return $9,000 of money from that wasted area. And also we could get into this ridiculous situation where farms become undervalued because, or their discount is valued because of the ineffective area of a water race. The cost of upgrading one or both of the RDR 50 millimetre outlets would be less than $50,000. I'm assuming we just need to put a water meter on it. It's under pressure, and yeah, 1 litre a second would be enough to supply any farm. When the RDR shuts down and the siphon is completely drained, water could be pumped back from the Craycroft main and possibly supplied from the Silver Stream. There is water available, it only needs to be a will to use it. I'll just go through some of the properties. There's property 5486. It's on your map there. It has water available from the RDR. The only time it doesn't have water available is when the RDR shut down. And also there's a small lease on a council lease on that property, which they've put an objection in for that, but there's certainly water available for that. And there's property 5499. The only reason they want the water race for that is for flood protection. The farm itself is 78 hectares and deer fence, and says it's got no water reticulation systems. I don't know how the deer get any water, because there's no water race there. Property 5514, there's water available from either the RDR or pumped up from the Craycroft main. So there's certainly water available there. Property 24028 has the Craycroft main and Stockwater. It also has a Silver Stream drain running through it. And the neighbour on the bottom side's got a well that supplies his whole farm, so there's certainly water there. Property 5485 could be supplied from the RDR. And property 5490 has its own reticulation supply and only needs the race because it leases the farm next door, which doesn't have a water race. So to me, that objection should be discounted. So all in all, yeah, if there's a will, there's a way to use this water. There's plenty of water in Anima. It's just a matter of people wanting to use it, and I don't think the water race is necessary at all. Good, thank you.
Thanks, Alistair. Any questions of Alistair? Mayor Brown.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Alistair, you talked about the RDR siphon, and you talked to Mel Brooks about that, and there's 10 litres a second available. Mel Brooks runs MHV, not RDR, so how reliable is that information from Mel Brooks?
Well, that's the problem that I've got. I can only do so much as an individual person, and I've got contacts in RDR. I've talked to Neil Stevens from RDR. He wasn't quite so confident of the 10 litres because of the siphon. The Surrey Hill siphon can only take 25 cubics as far as I know. I said to him, what's 10 litres going to mean in a 25 cubic siphon? The other option is to do a water swap and take the water in from the South Ashburton intake, because the brothers, where this water comes from is from the brothers intake from the South Ashburton. So as we all know, the RDR has got an intake from the South Ashburton. There could be a water swap there. And also the fish screens, nobody seems to have mentioned the fish screens as well, but yeah, going back to your point, yeah, 10 litres a second is probably the Rolls-Royce option. These farms would only need 1 litre a second per farm. So
yeah, I was just trying to ascertain whether whether you can actually get 10 litres if it was available. Would RDR let you let the council take 10 litres, or the users take the 10 litres? That's.
I think with a bit of help from the council and a bit of help from RDR, Mel Brooks she said there's water there, but as you say, I can't guarantee that water is available.
Yeah.
But
it's an option.
It is an option that it's frustrating from my point of view, because I can't go to RDR and say, well, this water's here. I know it's there.
Yeah. But
I can't get it out of the RDR without the council's help, RDR's help, and Mel Brooks's help.
That's right. So what you've ascertained is that the water could be available there, and council would need to do some work on it.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Any further questions? No, it doesn't look like it. Thanks, Alistair. You'll have your right of reply once we've gone through all the other submitters. So next up we have Andrew McKenzie. And Lindley? Morning. So you just need to press the yes button there. No, other side. There you go.
No, thank you. So I've been nominated to speak for our family, so.
Just going to be loading kettle, but they went early this morning.
Okay, so my name's Lynley Mackenzie and I'm speaking on behalf of my husband Andrew and our 2 adult children. Andrew has lived in Anamar his whole life. We took over the farm from his parents Doug and Doreen Mackenzie around 2006. Now we're planning for the succession of the next generation. We have 2 parts to our farm, with one part being 80 hectares, which is bounded by Hekio, Heenans and Peters Road. It's in a rectangle shape with a water race that runs right through the middle. This is placed perfectly as the stock on the paddocks either side of the water race can access it with ease. We pay rates on this and maintain it regularly. There are no other water races close to this and we don't have irrigation on the farm. The house on this farm is on a shallow well which has run dry in the past. This is only used for the house and wouldn't stand any excess pumping for use on the farm. As it stands, we have no access to any water other than that water race. Without this water, we cannot run stock as we do now. It is an integral part of our farming operation that we have stock on a rotation of our farm. This water race is not an inconvenience for us, but it is a necessity for our farming operation. We have hives on our farm as well, and in the height of summer you can see these bees drinking from the sandy edges of our water race as the closest river goes dry every summer. It is also important that they have a place to go. It has been suggested that we put a well down, however wells in this area can be unreliable, and it is really not an option for us. We can't justify going to all that expense for a potentially unreliable well when we already have a perfectly good infrastructure in the form of the current water race. The flooding issues we've endured over the last 2 years due to excessive weather events have been detrimental to our farm and state of mind, with the continuing stress for caring for our stock, the potential failure of crops and our welfare. As it stands, even with the water races in place, we are still getting all the excess surface water from these heavy rain events, which end up coming across and down Heenans Road from neighbouring farms, and in turn end up scouring out the road in the process and then going right through our property in about 3 places. This damages our farm by washing away soil, crops and putting the livestock at danger. This seriously impacts our farming operation. The council are already aware of this road being washed out several times a year, and they've been trying to fix it with grading and also putting in soak holes at the end of Heenans Road. To get rid of the water race, this will exasperate the problem tenfold. Not only our farm, but farms and buildings below us will be impacted severely down Hekio Road, as Andrew knows only too well from living at the bottom of Hekio Road. We note on that report that there is a recommendation to keep this water race open, and we do support that report, that option really. Without this water race, it will render our farm unworkable. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew, do you have anything to add? You'll just need to turn your microphone on if you do.
No.
No, all good. Any questions? Councillor Lovett.
I was just going to ask, does the water race ever get dry?
The water race that we're using now?
Yes.
No, because it feeds out of the brothers, so it's regulated, so there's always water in it.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
If you could get a reticulated system, would you be interested in it?
Well, there's no. The RDR goes dry for those 3 years. I know it sounds 3 years, 4 weeks every 3 years doesn't sound much, but it's when we really need it. So RDR is not an option for us unless we can get other water to us.
Councillor Wilson, I'll just get you to turn your light off. Thank you. Mayor Brown.
Just questioning the RDR going dry for 4 weeks. Generally only have a 2-week shutdown when they need to shut down.
Well,
that I'm aware of.
Yeah, potentially, yeah. So over that period of time is a lot of water, because that's potentially when we have the winter grazing on.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of water, and then pumping from the Craycroft is quite a wee way to get it pumped across. So
Yeah.
it'll be an expense
The second question is, you say that if the race was closed and with the flooding issues you have up there, it would be detrimental. Could you just expand on that a wee bit? Why that? It's a water race. It's not a drain.
Yes,
so-
but when in those bigger floods, big events, they actually turn the intake off. So the brothers' intake is turned off, but when it's still turned off, those water races are still full. So clearly, it's gathering up surface water. So then without that cut off, it's all going to come down, and it comes down across from the Surreys and then onto Heenan's Road and round the corner, and floods down there. So yes, you can say the water race not a storm drain, but if it wasn't working as a storm drain, how come when they turn the intake off, those water races are still full? So clearly, it's gathering up surface water. There has been mentioned that we can put swales through, but the swales won't work under a crop. So if it's in a crop, some grass paddock, a swale might help, but when it's cultivated, it'll just hit the swale and then just go. So in the meantime, it's been controlled to an area to a certain degree, but if you take that control away, who's to know where the water's going to end up?
So for a heavy rain event, if they turn the brothers' intake off and then the race becomes a drain,
Yes.
where does that water go?
Well, it just follows the water race as it is now.
Just it ends up at someone else's place.
Well, it just ends up in the water race system that we're using now for drinking water. Yeah, not all of it clearly, but it is doing a job because it's a real low point at NMR School Road, and then Heenan's Road, and there's just a real low patch there, and all the water will tend to head straight down there. And we've seen in my days flooding where the father was there, right across NMR School Road, and the next two houses up were underwater. Dad's house is underwater. Yeah. So it can happen, and without some sort of control, it will happen more regularly, and that would be the point where it's going to be the worst affected.
Thanks.
Councillor Cameron,
Thank you.
just a bit closer to your mic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just a question with regards to the well. You said that they were unreliable. Do you mean finding the water is unreliable or maintaining water in the well is unreliable?
Both. The wells that are there are more around the river and the galleries, but where we are, there's on Peters Road, we've got two driveways, but the house is off Peters Road. That was staying pumping for the house, but only just a house well, if you didn't put any more on it. If you know, all the houses along Hekio Road, a lot of them are on RDR water because of this, the wells aren't
So
significant.
people have had a look for wells and they can't,
Yes,
they have a
well,
spot for water and they can't.
There was a well, it might be on the council one, but there was a well down on Anima Settlement Road that Neil McKenzie put down.
Yeah.
And then I'm not sure how far down they went in the end, but it was below 200 metres
Okay.
and didn't get well. And then there was dairy farms next door to us put a well down 200 metres, didn't get anything. So that it's very, very hit and miss. Yes, we.
A lot of money, you
Yeah.
don't want to go for nothing.
Thank you. There's no further questions, so thank you both.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Paul Grigg. To welcome you up. You'll just need to press the light on the microphone. Yes, thank you.
Morning, councillors, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here and appear before you to present our case for closing this Stockwater race. Surrey Hills has 1,900 metres of the Stockwater race running through it. Well, so if you multiply that by 5, that's 10,000 square metres of land area that is out of production. There are 8 culverts and a siphon that goes under the RDR at the end of the race where it leaves the property. These all block and they all require maintenance. These blockages are especially onerous during flooding. I mean, you're up to your neck in water. It's dangerous, and we do get, as been alluded to, substantial flooding coming through all this flat area between us and all the way down through the Stockwater system. This race cuts across the natural water courses. It speeds up and concentrates the flooding. It's quite obvious that this is actually part of the flooding problem. It's a straight line unit and it cuts straight across natural watercourses. So to the point of flooding down country, this actually exacerbates it and accelerates it through our property. We have a reticulated water scheme through all our paddocks. We have no need for a stockwater race. This race diagonally crosses 2 paddocks, so any cultivation, drilling and spraying are compromised. We have to focus on user pays. The cost of cleaning and maintenance must rest with the users. The clearing of the intake and the regulating of the flow by council staff is ongoing. The potential cost of a fresh screen will be a huge impost on ratepayers, and we are going to have to face the fact that environmentally we are going to be pushed into these situations. The users must find an alternative stockwater, For so few users to load the cost onto ratepayers and waste water in an open stock race, this needs to be justified. The decision to close must pass a fairness test to all ratepayers. There will be a solution to this water situation. It just needs a commitment to spend capital. We must save water and advance our stock health. These open water races are not healthy. They never have been, and they never will be. To continue the status quo is a derelict answer to an antiquated system. We cannot be seen by the community as water wasters and an expense to ratepayers. Look, I thank you for the opportunity to present this, and it's quite heartening to actually see there's a democratic process to examine local water issues that still exists in this country. So that's my part. Thank you again.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Hooper.
Hi.
Good morning.
Can you expand on why the open water races aren't healthy?
Because there is always a contamination from waterfowl. The waterfowl contamination is much greater than we realise. They are in huge numbers, waterfowl. They're everywhere. In a point, they are concentrating on these water races. They are certainly in rivers, they are on ponds, they are on irrigation ponds. But that is a primal fecal contamination, is waterfowl. And their numbers are growing.
Okay.
Mayor Brown.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Paul, for your submission. Just one of the previous submitters talked about bees and they drink out of these water races. So if there was no water race, where do you think the bees would get their water from?
Well, this water race runs pretty much parallel to the Hines River. We have beehives on the property, and the beehives are on the natural watershed from the hills. If I'm about to move around the farm, the concentration I see of bees is around the beehives, which are nearly all situated on our property, situated next to the Hines River. I see very, very little evidence of bees in this water race.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Paul, you've got a reticulated system. Where do you get your water from for that?
The water from that is from a natural spring. It is above the Upper Downs Road. It is a scheme that we put in 9 years ago, and it is something that we pinch ourselves every day to actually have this there. The stock are so much more comfortable with clean water.
Thank you. Paul, no further questions. Our next speaker is Malcolm Clapperton. Good morning, Malcolm.
Good morning. Sorry about the apparel, but I'm late getting to bleeding a heap of cattle. I live in Hikio Road. While we only have a small amount of water race on our property, it is a nightmare to maintain, and we are very keen to see it shut down. With the misuse of the race by farmers upstream from us who mainly letting mainly dairy cattle into the race, causing large amounts of silt to be suspended in the water. It is rare to see the race running clear at any time of the year. The suspended silt then drops out as it flows through our property, caused by the race flattening out and the water slowing down, and a pipe which carries the race across that silver stream which you've heard about. Meaning we get a huge amount of build-up, and as a result we have to clean the race out 2 to 3 times a year. We also get a massive amount of oxygen weed growing in there due to the quality of the water. We note that a farmer made the comment in the survey that closing the water race will upset the natural biodiversity. It's too late for that. The suspended silt dropping out has already caused the loss of freshwater mussels that used to be in the race when we moved there 7 years ago. And most of the freshwater fish that lived in the race have gone as well. It is very rare even to see a cockabilly in there now. When the race was shut down a short time ago for 3 days and went totally dry, which is contrary to what I've heard, there was no sign of fish in a couple of the remaining puddles in our section of the water race or our neighbours, because we checked. It has had a test done and is full of E. coli, due in part to by the fouling of the water by the cattle having access to pee and poo in it. I submitted evidence of this in photos with our first submission. A downside to an open water race is when crops are being sprayed, the spray often ends up being sprayed into the race, as we have observed across from our property. Another downside of the race not being looked after properly is when we have large rain events, the race overflows, and sometimes the race is not shut off in time. This water then runs down the road and runs into our property, causing damage to the driving culverts, which means getting diggers in, which we've had to do in the past. We don't need the water for our stock, as we have a stream known as locally as Silver Stream, which runs through all of the properties on our road, which can provide water which has never run dry in the 7 years we've been on the property. Plus we have 50,000 litre domestic rainwater storage, which we can also use to fill troughs. Under the revised council charging for the race, the people with the smaller lengths, like we have, are getting charged more in proportion to farmers with longer lengths, which is totally unfair. It's inevitable that water races will be closed down, as they are grossly inefficient. From memory, when I managed a property at Westerfield, the local water ranger said that the percentage used to water in is below 20%. Modern day farming methods don't suit open water races. It's time to close this one down. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any questions? Mayor Brown.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Malcolm, for your submission. So where do you get your water from to do your stock in-house?
We have a 50,000 litre rainwater system coming off our roof, and also there's that stream that comes right down to that, what they call Silver Stream. It runs right down through the properties, which has never run dry since we've been there.
Yep, thank you.
Any further questions? No. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, we're running a little wicked on time, but that's all right, is Michael Rushton. Morning, Michael.
Morning. Morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to chat with you this morning. Our farm is situated at 133 Hikio Road. It comprises of two blocks. The home block is leased to the Align Group, which in this block supports the grazing of 1,000 young calves. It is my understanding that since the submissions closed, this company has since notified the council it would only support the closure of the race system if 100% of the users were in agreement. The school block is leased by Lower Downs Limited and is an arable dairy support block, growing crops and wintering up to 600 cows. The current tenant is against the race being closed. Both properties leased to separate business rely on the ADC water race system. The home block has some trough water, which comes from the RDR siphon. This water comes to the farm under 4 bar pressure, and then it is gravity fed over approximately 30 hectares or 8 paddocks. We installed this system 5 years ago to cover spring-fed creeks that ran dry during the summer. The rest of the farm water for the stock comes from Silverstream and the ADC race system. Now, contrary to what I've heard so far, the Silverstream does actually go dry. Well, it doesn't go dry, but the water runs underground and then reappears. So at times, Silverstream is actually dry in some places. Both tenants rely on the RDR system for sustaining livestock farming. Without the race system, would no longer be able to sustain livestock grazing. All races are fenced off and with dedicated drinking bays that are backfilled with hard fill. This is to maintain water quality and to maintain the integrity of the race edge. So the cattle do not have access to the water race system, only in the dedicated drinking bays. The water used in the trough system is supplied via the RDR at an intake off the Lower Downs Road. It is a non-documented supply that dates back to an historic agreement between the then Ministry of Works and the run holders along the Lower Downs Road. It is a privileged supply with no legal documentation to support it or to support a long-term take. This supply is not consistent as the RDR is closed down. I'm going to challenge the information that I've heard because it is not every 3 years. Occasionally it is every 2 years, and it's not for 2 weeks. It can be up to 5 weeks on occasion. So it's definitely not a 2-week shutdown. This supply is not consistent when the RDR is closed. So therefore, any extension of the system over the whole property would expose the current grazing system. The risk includes infrastructure investment loss, that during that shutdown, the trough system is rendered unusable, unless substantial storage system is developed to cover this period. This storage system would have to be in the vicinity for our 38 hectares, that is, or for the home block, would have to be in the vicinity of 200,000 litres. So that's one calf drinking 5 litres of water per day for a period of 4 weeks. So substantial storage cost, plus we still have a limited time to fill those storage tanks when it's shut down. So Silverstream, yeah, it's not as consistent as I've heard. I've lived in the area for 62 years. We have a domestic house well that provides an unreliable, well, it's unreliable, and it has been for many years. And we manage that carefully for the house supply. We also have a storage tank that stores water for the house, 30,000 litres, and that is supplemented by the RDR from time to time. We support the options analysis, points A to N, carried out by the ADC to keep the race system open. We're concerned that if the race was ever closed, that the runoff during heavy rain events would be in the main uncontrolled and ultimately would follow the road systems, causing damage to this infrastructure and causing damage to property through erosion and risk of flooding to buildings. Currently, the race system creates a path for this flood water to follow in a semi-controlled fashion. Over the years on Hekio Road alone, the race system has been used, and I've witnessed this as an 8-year-old, watching my father climb into a water race to block it, to fight a house fire. There's been 2 house fires on Hekio Road, and both houses were destroyed. There was another large rural fire, which if we hadn't had access to that immediate supply, which was right beside the houses, those fires potentially could have continued and done further damage to assets in the community. We have no sustainable replacement for the current race system. Insect and bird habitat must be a consideration in the event of a proposed closure. The survival of bees is the main concern here, as bee populations that rely on the water to survive. As we all know, without maintained bee numbers providing effective pollination, our arable and pastoral farming ecosystems are at risk and will fail. Studies show that bees cannot drink from water troughs and not without drowning. The comment made earlier about the Hinds River being a source of for the bees, that Hinds River in our area, there's a good stretch, probably up to 7 or 8 kilometres, that goes dry just about every summer for an extended period. So that argument is ridiculous. In closing, the benefits In closing, the benefits of closing the race for the convenience of some will inevitably lead to the economic and social disaster for others. Our early settlers and previous councils have maintained this asset and recognised its value over many years. Please do not be the council that undervalues this asset and in turn risks the livelihood of current and future generations of farmers associated with this race system. Thank you for your time. We implore you as our elected representatives to make the common sense decision to decline the application to close this water system.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions? No. Oh, yes, sorry, member.
Just do have one. One of the previous submitters talked about, Michael, that user pays. The costs must be borne with the users of the race. There's others who obviously don't want the race, yet they got to pay for it, and they not happy about that. And made the comment that the costs must be with the users. What are your thoughts on that?
Neil, I guess systems change in farming and have done over years, and the current system that some of the applicants are using, they've caused that change. They've decided to change their farming system. We didn't force them to change their farming system and put in irrigation and trough systems. So they made that conscious decision to change their farming type and not and then not wanting the water race system. So I guess it's freedom of choice, isn't it? They had the choice to not develop and yeah. So that's my argument, I guess. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Michael.
Councillor Todd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Michael, can you just explain to a townie? Yeah, I noticed that you're less than 1K from a piped irrigation system. Why wouldn't you join it?
From a piped irrigation system?
Yeah.
No, I'm not within 1K of a piped irrigation system. So
Okay.
we are within 1 kilometre of the RDR, which is the RDR. We have an off-take off that RDR, which I've said was a privileged supply. Yeah. There's no documentation that can be found in the council records or that will support a legal supply off the RDR. And I've looked historically at all the records through the RDR. When the Ministry of Works relinquished the ownership of the RDR, all those records were destroyed. But the understanding was when the RDR was put through the Anima area, it cut off a whole lot of natural streams that ran off Surrey Hills, and those spring-fed, or those streams fed livestock and sustained livestock. Those, so when the RDR was put in, it cut those off. So the agreement was then that those run holders could then tap into the RDR and use that water through periods when they required it. So we've done that because we do run short of water from both Silverstream and those spring-fed creeks that come off the hill. But as I say, it's only for a small portion of the farm. And it, I noted somebody talking about 50 grand to put a water scheme in. That's ridiculous. I spent 38,000 putting a water scheme in for 30 hectares. So that was putting a pipe under the road, running it down the road. This is a 50 mil pipe into a storage tank and then reticulated by gravity down through 8 paddocks. That was $38,000. So 50 grand is an unrealistic figure. Like I'm not going to put a financial figure on it, but it would be in the hundreds of thousands to reticulate a scheme through the affected farms. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. It's to do with going forward, the winter grazing rules is obviously one of the big, because you're obviously, your properties do a lot of winter grazing.
The tenants of a farm.
Yeah, the tenants do. So that's perhaps I'm looking at the farm type and how that works with an open water race channel. Do you see that being able to, fit for purpose in the future years coming up with the...
Richard, as I've said, we have our water races completely fenced off. They're backfilled with drinking bays. So we have 2 power poles that sit parallel with the race. They have an electric wire that run across the front of them, and then they're backfilled with free draining shingles so that the cattle can stand on that pad and drink out of the water races without contaminating the water. And we'll take the winter grazing thing as it comes, but at the moment it's not a conflict.
Thanks, Michael. That looks like all the question. Oh, so,
I was just going to go back to the biodiversity and the bees.
Yes, yeah.
And the water race. Is there systems out there for on sprinklers and other means for the bees? Are they working on that, or do they drink off irrigation? You know, congregate round there to drink. Do they only live on the water race? Go there.
My understanding, talking to two local beekeepers, is that the water troughs are not a source of water for bees. They drown. So, and they rely on spring-fed creeks, Silver Stream, and the ADC water race system to survive. So, but no, I don't think there's any other
No other means that you can supply water for bees on property. Okay.
I'm not sure, sorry, on that. Yep.
Yeah.
thank you. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. Yep.
Our next speaker is Graham Power.
Madam Chair, could I just ask the submission here, do you support the proposed works? And yes has been ticked and no's been ticked. Which is the right tick? Supporting or against it?
Either way. Either way.
Oh, can do
Either way.
Right, okay.
Graham?
We're all set to go?
Yes, all good to go. Yep.
Yep. Well, I'm one of the fortunate ones here. We farm between Hikio Road and Lower Downs Road. We've got a take-off from the RDR that feeds our Stockwater down through the farm. And the lay of the land, it's called gravity fed, and the Stockwater races cut across the farm, which we do use, but we don't have to use. The theory that bees don't drink out of water troughs is not quite correct, because we've got beehives at home and the bees drink out of our water troughs. So, but getting back to Stockwater races in the winter time with winter grazing and all that, they are a problem with quality of water. So it's basically about all I can add if anybody's got any questions, but
Yep, no, that's good. Anyone have any questions? Councillor Wilson?
Either you take water out of the RDR, is it out of the same offtake, is it that?
well, it's the same offtake that Mike uses, yeah.
Yeah. And have you had any contact with RDR or, you know, about that certainty or the, you know, the agreements around that?
Well, yeah, when we bought the farm 23 years ago, there was contact with the RDR and the lawyer and all that about the water supply and all that, but it has been reliable for us, except when the shutdowns are on, and they can take up to 4 or 5 weeks some years if there's maintenance goes on in the siphon itself.
Councillor Letham?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to confirm, Graham, you're comfortable which either way the decision goes. Is that what you're saying to us?
That's dead right. Yeah,
okay.
That's dead right.
Thank you.
Mayor Brown?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Graham, when the RDR is off for whatever length of time, what do you do for water then?
We're fortunate that there's a spring up in Gawler Downs that drains down through our place and that eventually ends up in the Silver Stream. So we just tap into that water supply and put it into our tank system. We have to pump it into our tank system and then gravity down through the farm as per usual.
Any further questions? No, thank you, Graham. Next up, we've got Pauline Hewson.
Actually, I'm Jo Hewson, and this is Pauline.
Hi, Jo, how are you? Thank you.
Mr Brown and members of the council, thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. I strongly disagree with the proposed closure of the NMR Stockwater race. I express this opinion as a representative of the Hewson family, who have farmed on this land for the past 88 years. Our property, Hopelands, is 135 hectares and covers the area directly east of NMR School Road. The discussed race has already split into two by the time it reaches Hopelands and enters at two different points along this road. where the race traverses the property, passing through 6 paddocks, stockyards, a shearing shed holding paddock, and the main stock laneway through the lower half of the property, a total of 46 hectares. This means 34% of Hopeland's stockwater is supplied by these races. We have no access to RDR water, and Silverstream borders our farm, but we have no access to this. Traditionally, the farm has been a sheep and mixed cropping business, with the main source of stockwater coming from these 2 races, which have been essential to the stock grazing operation. They have been and remain a very reliable, cost-effective and efficient source of stockwater. Through most of their course over Hopelands, the races are adequately serviced by culverts and have been fenced and planted on one side of the race to protect the quality of the water, improve ease of our maintenance, and to enable all vehicles and stock to cross without affecting the quality of the water, or to impact on or impair the efficiency of any other daily farming tasks we undertake. This is thanks to the future planning and investment of infrastructure of previous generations who envisaged these water races to be part of the landscape for the foreseeable future. At the present time, most of Hopelands is leased to 2 lessees, A&S Spencer and Lithian Farm. Both lessees are very satisfied with this arrangement and both rely on the water races for all the stock grazed in this leased area. The closure of this race would seriously undermine the farming practice of all 3 parties involved. And to install an alternative reliable system would incur considerable expense. Expense either to us as the owners, passing on the cost to the lessees, or, as the council proposes, to all of us, our families, neighbours, friends, all of you sitting out here as you're all Ashburton District Council ratepayers. The alternative schemes, as proposed by the ADC, either from the RDR or the BCI, appear to be costly to redirect to those properties that still require this or unreliable. The physiological makeup of the Anamar area means it is difficult and costly to drill for water, as many have discovered over the years. One example is of exploratory drilling made on our farm boundary. The drill went down 200 metres, broke twice and discovered no water. Other wells that have struck water at shallow levels have proved unreliable during our mid-Canterbury summers. Hopelands has a well for domestic purposes that is currently reliable, but a big concern is that any heavier demands would result in this well drying up. The water race is a council asset. During the recent heavy rains and consequent flooding, the water races did assist in draining water away. And even though there was still a lot of overflow and surface flooding, had the water race been closed at this time of the flooding, would have been a lot more widespread and destructive. The background reading, point 6 of the current situation, indicates that the council roading team has concerns regarding drainage issues and flooding risk on Anamar School Road, and it is their preference that this race is not closed. As the farm directly downstream of almost the entire length of Anamar School Road, we feel particularly passionate that our paddocks, our yards, our sheds and our home are not directly subjected to any increased flooding risk other than what already exists. I note that the option analysis, particularly causes A to M, largely seem in favour of retaining this race. If the decision is made to close it, I consider it unfair and inconsiderate to all those landowners who are making good use of a system that is efficient, low cost and working well within their current farming practice. And is that not what the ADC's priorities should be for the entire district? In conclusion, I state that we are totally opposed to Mr Morrison's proposal and in favour of the recommended option 1 to decline the closure of the Stockwater race. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Pauline, did you have anything you wanted to add? Just need to turn your light on if you do. And just pull the microphone forward a wee bit.
Because we've discussed it together and all our ideas have been presented by Joe.
Wonderful. Thank you. I've got a question from Councillor Cameron.
Thank you for your presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question with regards to the water quality. When the water arrives in the Stockwater race down to your place, your farm, have you noticed a deterioration of the quality? What is the wildlife like in the water race? Is there any?
By the time it enters the top race on Anamar School Road, we have in more recent years noticed that the quality is fine. There's been no concerns from the leasee regarding the quality of that water, and the insect life around there seems to be fine. However, after flooding, clearly the quality isn't great.
Of course. May I ask another question? Yes. Thank you. With regards to keeping the water race clean, is that a onerous job, or how is that?
It's an annual job.
Okay, and that once a year.
But it's made easy. Like I said, the infrastructure's been put in there. We are fortunate that we don't have a water race that dissects paddocks, but that's really due to planning and foresight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mayor Brown.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Joe and Pauline, for your submission. Well done. Just a question on the well. Does it go dry? And if it does, how often?
Our well's never gone dry. Never? No. However, my grandmother's well, 4 kilometres down the road, was always going dry. And I think that's probably what you've heard from a lot of the people talking. The water that is around is inconsistent, and that's a real expense to poke holes in the ground to maybe find something, maybe not. If you find it, how long is it going to be there for?
Thank you.
And can I add also that further down the Canterbury Plains are quite consistent with receiving the least deposits from the northwest winds, and so water is easier to find further down the plains. But because Anamar's in an area that was the original landform of New Zealand, some areas are impossible and others you can find it, but overall it's pretty unreliable.
Thank you. Councillor Todd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Joe, you don't indicate how close you are to a piped irrigation scheme. How close are you?
How close are we to a piped irrigation scheme? 2 kilometres from the RDR. Okay. That passes through another property.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions, so thank you both for your submission. Next up, we're supposed to have a morning tea break, but because we're running ahead of time, I think we'll continue on, and I think most people are here. So we've got Robert and Andrew Spencer. Sonia, are you coming up as well? No? Come on up. And you just need to turn the lights on. The right-hand one, yes, both on. Yep.
Good morning all. I'm Robert Spencer, father of Andrew, so I'm told, and I'm spokesperson for AE and SJ Spencer Limited, Burnside Farm, Anamar. Our farm is situated on the Anamar Settlement Road. We are a 540 hectare arable and lamb fattening enterprise. We also lease some of the Hopeland farm property from the Hewson family behind us. We are the last farm on that Stockwater race. We do have a domestic well that supplies the family home and cottage across the road, but it would not be capable to supply farm troughs for the volume of stock we farm. When we moved to Anamar, we were told previous owners, and we've heard a bit about this morning, we've heard there's plenty of water, but we've also been told by previous owners that's not there. And on our farm, Neil Mackenzie, that was mentioned earlier, did put a well down. I believe it was put in with the help of MAF at the time to try and find water. They went down just over 200 metres, but it was not successful. And MAF have since pulled that well out. We now have our third generation of Spencers wanting to farm this land, but if these races were closed and with the ongoing financial implications that could be forced on us to finding alternatives such as BCI, this would be extremely expensive and could affect the profitability of our farm for future generations. The RDR, which has also been mentioned, is not a reliable source of water all year round. And if the council did finance a new scheme, one wonders just how much this would cost on our rates. A little bit about our farming. We come under the heading of intensive arable lamb finishing. As well as growing conventional cereal crops, we grow a lot of vegetable seeds and finish about 6,000 lambs a year. I want to emphasise that in the 20 years we've been at Burnside, we've had planted around 1,000 deciduous trees. A combination of these trees and water races creates a cooling area, especially during the hot mid-Canterbury summers. We have a fear that these races, many with the trees planted alongside them, would die, and Canterbury has lost too many trees already. I'm going to digress a little bit from what I've got written here. We've planted oaks, ashes, poplars, acers, numerous trees. The first that would have been put in 20 years ago would now be probably 10 metres tall. And the one thing we haven't heard today, which I personally and my son thinks a lot of, is the environment. What would happen to these trees without the water races? Like many other farmers in the foothills, in May 2021 we had substantial amount of damage through flooding. I wouldn't like to imagine without the water races guiding the flood water how much more damage we would have had. We have personally had to call out the fire brigade twice, and if they did not have the ability to access the water races, we dread to think of the potential damage that could have been done. We do accept the right of the applicant, Mr Morrison, in his request for the closure of these races to enhance his farming use. But knowing the previous owners over a good many years, there never seemed to have been a problem. I realise the applicant is remodelling his farm, which we also did when we moved to Burnside 20 years ago. But with a lot of thought and a little expense, we were able to work around the obstacles. We support the option analysis points A&M carried out by the ADC staff to keep the race system open. Finally, thank you for listening on behalf of AE and SJ Spencer, and I wish to reiterate we do not support the closure of the water races in Anima.
Thank you very much. Andrew, do you have anything to add? Just turn your light on if you do.
Mainly the flooding, the damage that was done 2 years ago. There'd be a lot more, and these water races, if they get closed, they're going to get filled in. Where's all this water going to go to? That is really one of my main concerns. And the for stock with the sheep, and that it's a lot cooler by a water race. The water is a cooler water. If it's in a trough, it's hot. So sheep don't like them in hot water, but it's the cooling effect by the race, that for during the summer, and the environmental then that side with the wildlife.
Thank you. Any questions? Mayor Brown.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Welcome, Robert and Andrew. You say you're the last farm for the water race to conclude. So where does it go when it leaves your property?
Goes into your council RDR. You know, into the main council.
You have a main council race running on the east side of our farm.
Yep, I see on the map it drops in 2 places.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what's that race called? Is it?
I don't know. It's your council race. Your council race. You maintain it each year, and
you might have a number for it.
Yeah.
So Craycroft Main, by the sounds of
I
things.
wouldn't have known that's what it was called.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
If you live there that long, you know the name of the water race.
No.
Councillor Wilson.
Just out of interest, obviously we just talked about the Craycroft Main. The other 2 ones, you talked about planting along them. It's just along the two other races, the ones we're talking about closing. Is that where your planting is, or where?
That's where all the bulk of the trees are down alongside all the water races.
So you do have access to water on the farm from the main, but you're concerned about the trees and stop access to
No,
it.
that's not quite right. The Craycroft, evidently, what it's called, is on the east side of us, but to the west side of us, all the paddocks we have, including the Hewsons where we farm, rely on those water races. There is no other form of water.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Doesn't look like it. Thank you very much. We will now go to Gerard Rushton, so welcome, Gerard.
Thank you, councillors. I'd just like to start by acknowledging all the previous submitters. And I don't envy the council of their decision. There's some good points being made on both sides. It's going to be quite a tricky decision. My property is property 5482, which is 100 hectares, and it has 1,830 metres of race on it, which this process has been quite valuable because I found out the council's been overcharging me for 25 years, so I'll be talking to you about that later, Brownie. In saying that, my property is probably the most affected because the race splits and goes down through it in two directions. So per hectare, the cost of this is probably the most of anyone in the application phase. To me, the races have served the purpose for a number of years, but that time has come. The intensification of farming means that they're not now suitable, and I think they're seen in many other regions across the plains as well. The water quality is no longer suitable for stock, in my opinion. I've lived there all my life. Back in the day, you'd think nothing of getting off the tractor on a hot summer's day and go and have a drink out of a water race, but I don't think anyone in this room would do that now, and I think everyone would probably admit to that as well. So to that ends, I mean, we're all duty bound to fence them off for environmental reasons now. This comes at a cost and is also quite problematic to the maintenance and increases the maintenance cost of the schemes as well. To do that, to fence off the legal requirement now is 5 metres. So to fence off a water race, by the time you take the width of the water race and 5 metres, you're going to be talking about 8 metres. So in my situation, that's 1.5 hectares. So it is quite, a high proportion of the, of 100 hectare property compared to all the rest. But if you look at it economically, the cost of the rates on my property, the cost of an average of maintaining those, of cleaning those, and the loss of production of land is probably around $4,000 a year to my property. And so I think that's one thing that everyone else has missed previously is that cost could actually go a long way to funding a substantial, infrastructure to put a trough scheme in. So, and interesting in the submissions, I'd like to probably ask a question of the council why the council chose to in their lease blocks to object to the closing, or was this decision left to the lessees? In which case, just remind the council that people that lease houses in town don't get the chance to vote. So I just asked the council why those 3 council lease blocks are counted as votes against this proposal. And also question the $50,000 for installing the water meters on the RDR. I think that's quite an expense, and also ask the council what their proposed costs and how of installing fish screens on the intake is going to be funded, what the cost of that would be, and I think that needs to be taken into consideration, and that all the ratepayers probably need to know that before a decision is actually made, because that will impact on the running costs of the scheme going forward, and it's a very real issue that will have to be dealt with. And I think that the council must be aware of the cost of maintaining that intake, and increasingly that intake is getting blown out more and more, and I mean, it's quite often this, where the scheme is down for a number of days, and it is happening more. So there's a substantial cost in actually maintaining that intake. And, you know, from a personal point of view, I mean, it's pretty hard. We're lucky enough, we've got 2 wells on our property, one 7 metres deep with a static water level of 4 metres, which has never gone dry. That at the moment, for the last 5 years, has been used to provide stock water in a reticulated scheme, which we installed. One of the reasons we installed that was to ensure biosecurity for the stock around M. bovis, which is a consideration that needs to be taken in as well when you're talking about open race schemes. So we're fortunate enough to have that in another well. So there is water. I've got a gallery in the front paddock, which was installed 15, 20 years ago, and it's got a static water level of about 4 metres as well. So those wells that house well has never gone dry. I do appreciate that some house wells in the area are vulnerable, and some people have said that they don't want to put any more pressure on them. I think that you've got to be conscious of the fact that you can actually, by building storage in your stock water scheme, you can take the pressure off your house wells to ensure that you don't, you know, by having tanks there, you can build security into that. So, so that's basically, you know, we are against, we're for having the race closed, and that's it. I welcome any questions.
Thanks, Jed. And the questions you asked, we'll discuss those in deliberations. Lynette, Councillor Lovett.
I was just looking at the new setbacks that have been there for, you know, put there. Going forward, how do you think these are going to work? And then, you know, with all the, is there controls on you what you plant in that setback between the water race and your new fencing, or do you see this becoming a fire risk in the future?
Well, that's problematic, isn't it? And
Yeah.
that's why the maintenance of the races. In the old days, when the farming wasn't quite as intensive, and there was probably more sheep than cattle in the area, they controlled the weeds in the race, and now it just silts up, grows weeds. It's 6 foot tall on grass. Then you got to spray it. So, I mean, is that environmentally friendly for everyone else drinking downstream as well? I mean, at minimum, if the races are not closed, well, I mean, I would urge that the council need to look at putting the race through my place at least into one race, and then getting an option along their road frontage to supply the others, because I think it's an unfair burden on my property for everyone else downstream, and we don't want it, and quite a cost on us.
Mayor Brown.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Jude, for your submission. You've got 2 races, I see on the map, it's split, so you've got the most water race, and you talked about the cost. What does it cost you for your 100 hectares to council rates for the water races, the 2 you've got?
It depends what you should be charging or what you are charging.
Well, let's go with what we are.
Hey?
Let's go with what we are.
It's $1,247.
$1,247.
Yeah. And it's normally, you know, around 80 cents to, well, according to a contractor, around 80 cents to $1 a metre cleaning per year.
So you wouldn't not happy about paying that, but if the water race stayed, would you have a solution?
Well, if the water race stays, I'm not using it, so why should I be paying for it?
Yeah. So what's your solution to that?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, why? I mean, if we're not allowed to use it, not using it, because, I mean, why should we pay to maintain it, at least? I mean, I think the council's probably got to look at coming to the party to at least maintaining it. I mean, in a lot of the situations, those in recent years, the silt build-up has been huge in those creeks, and I've got mounds this high on either side of it's a bloody mess.
Great, thank you. Doesn't look like there's any further questions. No. Thanks, Jed.
Thank you.
So we do have one more speaker, and that's Mihaela Williams. She is due to speak at 10:50 a.m. So what we might do now is we'll have a 20-minute morning tea break. We'll come back here at about 10:30. Hopefully we can get hold of her to see if she can come in a little bit earlier, and we'll hear from her, and then we'll have Alistair's write a reply, and then we'll go into deliberation. So you're all welcome to join us next door. It's not the biggest room in the world, for a cup of tea. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome back to our hearing. We just have one more speaker, and that's. If you'd like to come up to the front, please. And just turn on the microphone. Thank you.
Hi there, everyone. So I live on 33 Hikia Road, and I really have two main problems with that race. One, it's a constant build of silt, and that is due a lack of flow. And the second one will be the flooding. Every heavy rain, we get flooded. So the silt build-up is because there is no flow, or there is no constant flow as it's being diverted. And flooding, it's because it's got sharp turns, it breaks out, and it runs through the paddock. It actually doesn't flood the race. There's times there is no flow in the race whatsoever, yet there's water running from up where it breaks out and runs through the paddocks, and it stops on my property as it's a low point. So my front two paddocks are flooded every single heavy rain, and it stops, doesn't go further from there because I am the low point. The problem is that when those paddocks are flooded, if you go to the race, there's no water there, or hardly any. So it breaks out further up. The reason for that is blocked culverts or broken down ones. It does require maintenance, probably a lot of maintenance, which we are hiring. We have been hiring Rion Blake before, and he comes and cleans ours out, but makes little to no difference. We have contacted the council before. Dave Jones, I think is his name. He came. He has solved our problems. That's regarding the flow, but didn't last very long. And because there is no constant flow, there is a high build of silt all the time. So therefore, I support the closure of this race. Thank you. That's all I've got.
Thank you, and we appreciate you coming down here early too. Any questions for Michaela? Mayor Brown.
Thanks, Michaela, for your submission. Just one question. If the race was closed, will that stop the flooding problems that you're getting?
I assume it will.
Why would it do that?
Because the race further up, where it breaks, it's got sharp turns. Once it's closed, there's no water to break out.
Yeah, but you said you get flooding when there's heavy rain.
Yes.
Yeah, so if the water race was closed and you had heavy rain, would you still get flooding?
Well, I assume my flooding is caused by this race.
Okay. Yep. Thanks.
Any other questions? Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, and thank you for your submission. Just wondering what water supply you'll use once the Stockwater race is closed.
Rainwater tanks.
And I'll ask a supplementary question on that. Do you have those in place already?
Yes.
You do? Yeah. Thank you. No further questions, so thank you again.
Right, thank you very much.
You're welcome to stay and listen, or if you need to go back to
sorry.
work, head back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll turn this off now.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So we've heard from all our submitters. It's now time to have Alistair come back for a right of reply. No, we're not done. That's later, deliberations.
Thank you for the option of the right of reply. Just seems to me, generally speaking, that the people that don't want the water race have got reliable wells and good water supply. The people that objecting to the water race closing don't seem to have a good water supply, and it seems to me that it doesn't. I think it's obviously people need to spend a little bit more money and get their own water supply rather than relying on other people. I'm sick of paying rates on our water race. We've fenced the water race off. We've got more water races on our property than probably anybody else in the room because we've got other water races. So it's annoying to hear people that don't really want to do anything. They expect somebody else to solve their problems. And yeah, we've drilled a well to 200 metres as well. So it's, water is hard to find. We went back to digging a gallery, as I said before, 4 metres or 5 metres down. There's water there. There seems to be water all around Anamar at shallow water levels, but not deep water levels. So I just wanted to know where the council is at with their surface water strategy. I think it was adopted in 2018. That's something that this water race closing apparently is consistent with that water strategy, and I'm not too sure where the council is with that. Maybe you could take that up in deliberations. Also, the long-term strategy, as I understand it, that all the stock water is going to come out of the RDR eventually. And the reason for that is that there's a fish screen already on the RDR, and I understand that there aren't any fish screens on the well, certainly not on the Brothers intake anyway, or any other stock water intake. So the cost of doing that, I'm damn sure I don't want to bear it anyway, because we've fenced off our water races. We don't use them. All they do is grow grass. They continually block up because there's no stock in them, and to be honest, they're a damn nuisance. I see one of the submitters said that they've got drinking bays. Well, we've tried the drinking bay thing, and you've got 500 heifers drinking out of an area the width of this room. It's just ridiculous. It becomes an absolute bloomin' bog hole. And I can't believe in it. Okay, these people have got their farms leased out. How do they know what's going on their own farm anyway? Like, I run my own farm. I live there. I try to make sure that I do things properly. I'm not saying that we do it perfectly, but to hear that sort of stuff and then talk about trees dying, you can't grow a tree in mid-Canterbury without a water race. Well, that's complete and utter rubbish. The other thing too, the quality of the water, and I've got to be honest about the quality of the water in the water race. I've never actually measured the quality of it. I don't know who has. But I have measured the quality of the water in our well, and that was done down at the Mayfield show with MHV. You won't believe this, it was under 0.1 of parts per nitrates per million. And that's probably the lowest nitrate level of any well in the district. And we've got proof of that if anybody doesn't believe it. The flooding thing, it just seems to be ridiculous. It's people that want the water race open, they think flooding, they need it for flooding. Well, you can leave the water race open anyway. It's got no water and it's probably a damn good thing. You can just let it run down the water race. Well, you don't have to fill it in. There's nobody saying that you've got to actually fill it in. You just leave it there. I know what I'll be doing is filling it in because I need the land. I'll take the fence down and I'll farm it and I'll actually make a living out of it. I haven't leased my farm out. I'm trying to make a living doing what I'm doing. So yeah, it is a bit frustrating. Yeah, the water quality thing, the flooding just seems to be what side of the fence you're on. Either flooding suits you or it doesn't suit you. Seems to happen anyway. And one thing that does, in that the major floods in 2021, May 21, that water race goes over the north branch of the Hines River in our farm, and it's got a flume there, and the shingle build up from the water, from the actual river. Barry Quantock was telling me he used to be able to drive his bulldozer under that flume back in the day. Now it's only about 2 metres above the water level. Well, what happened in those floods? It just all blocked up. The whole flume just completely blocked up. I've got photos of it and had to get a digger in to clean it out. And people going about the flooding down Hekio Road. Well, most of that water came from the river. That was that damn flume going over the river that carries the water race blocked up. Most of that water obviously end up down Hikio Road, and they're blaming the water race. Well, yeah, blame the damn water race, because that's the reason it caused half the flooding. So anyway, it's a bit frustrating, and one interesting point is one of the objectors there's father actually came up with a plan to pipe all the water race system in the 1990s. Now, it's obviously, I don't know, obviously hasn't worn off much on his son anyway. And the bee thing, I think that's just a load of rubbish. There's, I talked to a beekeeper and said bees will find water no matter where. They'll fly up to 1 kilometre. Well, most of these farms are within 1 kilometre of the RDR or the Silver Stream or the river. Okay, when it's got water in it, most of the time it's got water somewhere. There's always a pool of water somewhere around that bees can drink out of, so I don't think that's a problem. Yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah. The other thing too is the good soils up there at Anima, and there are some very good soils there. What happens with the water race after you clean, everyone comes along with a digger and they get deeper and deeper and deeper, and the banks build up higher and higher and higher. And okay, I don't know how these cattle actually get into the water race to drink. I honestly do not know, and I'm pretty sure the people on these farms, if they're leased out, they probably don't know themselves, and they don't care. The water quality is just a mess with cattle. Okay, in the sheep days, it was fine. We used to be sheep farmers. I was a 3rd generation sheep farmer, and I actually voted against the piping of the scheme back in the 1990s. But that's 30 odd years ago. Mid-Canterbury farms are far more intensive now than what they were then. Every bit of land is valuable. We can't afford to have land taken up by poor quality water. And yeah, one of the submitters said he wouldn't drink out of it. And when I was a kid, I actually enjoyed playing in water races. We had fish in them. Really enjoyed my childhood around water races, but I've got grandchildren and they wouldn't go near it, and I wouldn't blame them. I wouldn't go near it myself. So I think there's a few lessons to be learned there. If we want intensive farming to continue in Mid-Canterbury, I think we don't need water races. We've got other supplies of water, and it's plentifully available for the people who have got a will to actually go out and find it and use it. So yeah, welcome any questions.
Thank you. I don't think we have questions for right or reply, but thank you very much, Alistair. So that completes all the submissions. So now we will move, and everyone's welcome to stay for the duration of the deliberations. We'll invite Tony Durham up, along with Chrissy Drummond and Andy Guthrie. Might just need an extra seat there. So Tony's going to go through our... I'll wait till you get set up, Tony, and then I'll... Yep. So I'll hand over to you, Tony, and if you can just run through a few bits and pieces first, then we'll start our deliberations. Thank you.
Good as gold. Thank you very much, Councillor McMillan. So this morning you've heard from your submitters regarding the proposed closure of the Stockwater race. What I want to do is just provide a bit more context around it and just help to lead you through this deliberation process. I'm only the process person. The guns in the room are sitting to my left, and they will be able to help answer the technical questions from Council's side of things. So just as we do with every other hearing, I'm just going to assume that everybody has read all the material that you've been provided. You've all been present here to listen today, so that means you're well informed to make the decisions or to ask the questions you need to ask. Today, what we want to do is systematically work through the main topics by reviewing the applications and the feedback that you've received via the hearings. And we're ultimately seeking council direction for the closure application. We do intend to bring a report back to Council on the 21st of December, so you do have the right to reserve a decision at this point in time. Just for context, we have a water races bylaw that was adopted by Council in 2019, and sitting underneath that bylaw is our standard operating procedure for the water race alterations, which includes closures. So this provides some structure and some guidelines for the officers when they're actually receiving applications to close and how that steps through. This has ended up being at the most important end of that guidelines because it's coming back to you for council decision, and that happens either when it's a significant length of race that needs to be closed, or as you've heard today, we've got really differing opinions about whether the closure should happen or not, because it will affect properties in different ways. So there's 20 affected properties by the Stockwater proposal, Stockwater race closure proposal. It's really evenly split. So you've got 9 that are supportive, 9 that are opposed, and 2 that will happy to go either way with council's decision. In terms of the reasons of why the closure is supported, the applicants have suggested that the ongoing maintenance is onerous, that really this will result in a reduction in costs for council and in turn for the affected properties through their rates. They believe that the water races provide poor water quality and that they're an inefficient way of supplying water to their properties. For those people who don't support the application to close the race, they believe they're concerned about the alternative supplies that would be required and how they can go about achieving those. They believe that the current system is efficient and it does work for those that use it. There's a line of thinking that the water races actually assist with moving surface water during flooding events, and certainly that's very front of mind given the last year's floods. And also that the water races do serve an alternative purposes for firefighting and also for the ecology of the environment. So the first report that was brought to you by council officers was declining the closure of the race on the grounds that the closure of the race will benefit some property owners and not others. Council does have a sinking lid on the Stockwater budget in the long-term plan. So perhaps the costs of supplying an alternative water supplies to those that will be most affected are going to be significant. And we may not have the budget to do so. Also, there's a line of thinking that this may set a precedent with other race closures in the future, and the costs of which are unknown. So they're the key questions that I think would be prudent to work through today, but I'm very conscious you'll have a lot of questions to ask before you get to that stage, so I might just roll you back, perhaps to the reasons for and against. Thank you, that's it from me.
Great, thank you very much, Tony. So I guess now we can, we've got Chrissy and Andy available for any questions. So we'll start with those first. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Tony. You said you had a report coming on the 21st of December. So what is in that report that may be relevant to what we're dealing with today?
Thank you, through the chair. It's effectively going to be the report that you've already got in front of you, but it comes back to council. If there's anything new that comes to light today, it could be included, but it will be that's the decision-making report. Nothing new from our side of things.
Okay, so just to clarify, we can make a recommendation from this hearing to go to council?
Yes, you can.
Either way, yep. Okay, and then that will be presented with the report at the meeting on the 21st of December?
Yes, yep. Correct.
Great, thank you. All on the same page. Mayor Brown.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Probably a question for Andy or Chrissy, one or the other. So this race starts at the Brothers intake? Yep. And it has no fish screen at the moment?
Yeah, so it's effectively a side race off the South Ashburton main. So it doesn't come directly off the intake, but off that system. And yeah, the Brothers is one of the fish screen sites that we are looking at.
So this comes off the side race. So if you split that water coming down to this race and water carrying on to others, what would the rough percentage be coming on this one? Half it, quarter of it, a little bit?
I'd say less than a quarter of it. The main race is the South Ashburton main.
Yep. So closing this race wouldn't get rid of the need for the fish screen on the intake?
No.
You'd still need the fish screen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks.
Councillor Lovett.
First of all, I was just going to ask, have we got a costing on the fish screen? What would be required there? Because someone's got to pay for this ultimately if we keep all these races open in the district.
Yeah, so we've only just started the tentative steps towards detailed design of the fish screening infrastructure. I think I may have used a figure to council previously of about 400 to 600,000, but equally I've heard bigger numbers than that as well. So yeah, until we get a design, it's hard to say.
And it followed another question I was just going to ask, have we sat down with the other major like the MHB Water and the RDR and with council trying to solve solutions in this area for the people who actually use this water? Have we sat down and talked about other solutions, piping, in the past, or can we do that going forward?
So my understanding is we've done through the standard operating procedure that we invoke here. Chrissy's team's done a bit of work on what the alternatives might look like to try and find an alternative supply. But nothing's been, none of that is in any great detail. It was really just to give us a scale of what that might be. And I think the figure in the report was about 50,000 at least before we sort of stopped working on it.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. Within our Stockwater policy and the funding of the Stockwater races, are we allowed to look at alternatives in that if someone doesn't use their portion of the Stockwater race and fences it off, can that cost be transferred percentage-wise to those people on the system who do use it?
Thank you, through the chair. So that's dropping into the revenue and financing policy, which will be reviewed again before the next long-term plan, so later 2023. Council could consider that. It has investigated such a thinking in the past, but at that point in time, there was a lot of water to go into the bridge. There was a lot of unknowns and variables that were at play that gave officers, and then the advice to council was that we didn't have surety that we could do that in a way that was going to be spot on and fair. I would suggest that the funding of the Stockwater race will be a major topic of discussion for the next LTP. Right now it's funded 90% by the users and 10% via the general rate.
Councillor Wilson.
Yep, thank you. The supply being guaranteed a lot was put into that. And I just, out of interest to know that the brothers race, how reliable is that? And also within our supply agreement, I'll call it, do we guarantee 100% supply or do we have a lesser metric for that?
Through the chair, the brothers intake is reliable as when we have rain events. So as soon as it rains, we either shut it down or it gets washed out. It's as reliable as we can do, and we cannot guarantee water 24/7, 365. It's actually in our bylaw that we cannot provide that water continuously. Unfortunately, we're at rain events and weather events, all sorts, do impact on the ability to get water through.
And one further question, can I ask a further question? It appears to me if we decline the application to shut it, we're almost cementing this race in, which should be looked at a wider context of this whole supply race. You've talked about a brothers intake fish screen, and I note with interest there appears to be a lot of termination points within that race where the water's put into the ground. So is it not better to be looking at that whole concept of should we be looking at the wider race uses in that area? Because I see this on the map here, I can see 4 or 5 termination points where the water's going into soak holes effectively, which is probably not future-proofed. I don't think we'll be able to do that in the future, putting water from stock races into soak holes. So I'm just wondering if we look at this in too much isolation, we perhaps cause ourselves a bigger problem going forward. Would that be a fair?
Yeah, look, I totally agree. One of the roles that I have is to look at, so each of the individual closures come through my desk, and I'm trying to look at the bigger picture to try and work out whether or not a particular race system has a role to play going forward, or whether it's not. My assessment in the report, and it's included in the report, is that I didn't see any strategic value in this particular race system. In terms of looking at options bigger than that, we don't tend to do that, not for an individual closure application. And certainly the only thing I could say in terms of that sort of bigger context, Council is in discussions with the irrigation companies around opportunities, and we are actually awaiting sort of feedback on, basically looking for feedback from those schemes on what that might look like in the future. So there are things in play or in train that we're hoping might come to fruition, but at this stage, too early to say, and we certainly couldn't rely on that at this point.
Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question. The noted point 6, the roading team are concerned that if on Anima School Road, if the race was closed, there may be excessive flooding. Would there be any cost in mitigating that flooding? Like, do we have to have another culvert somewhere, or how would that? Is there any sequelae for the roading team? Or?
Look, I don't think any work was done on that. What I can say is that, again, when I'm looking at it from a strategic standpoint, I do look at stormwater. There was, from my reading of it, one of the race systems crossed, I think it was the Anima School Road, in a depression. So whether the race is there or not, there's going to be water there in a rain event, and that will require some form of mitigation. And yeah, whether maybe it's so, I don't know, but whatever the roading solution is, it won't necessarily come cheap.
So there's no crossover. Like if you shut the race, there's more flooding, or if you don't shut the races to the road from the roading team's perspective, there's no impact on that.
I think in this case there was going to be some impact on roading. That's why they were flagging their concerns.
But we don't know how.
Well, I don't think they were evaluated financially.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Brown.
Thanks, Madam Chair. You sort of partially answered my question before, but I'll just ask again clarification. Has MHV or BCI been asked if they could supply stock water to this area through their pipe system?
I've spoken both with RDR and with BCI. BCI would have to provide water from the Cavendish holding pond, but it would have to be piped, and that would come at considerable cost.
RDR or MHV?
I haven't talked to MHV about it. RDR have said that they, I've got Chinese words here. Their preference would be for an alternative stock water supply to be supplied and distributed via other means. Their concerns are that the couple of takeoffs that they have at the moment are unregulated and inconsistent with them going forward. So they have said that if we wanted, or the only option was the RDR, we would have to look at putting in install fully regulated equipment and take it all over, and that's where the cost would be at least 50k. It would be more than 50k to do that. So we have had discussions with them on the possibility. There are possibilities, but they all come at a cost, and who pays for that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about MHV, and I'm not sure, but this is probably not their area, is it?
That's correct, it's not.
Yes, but BCI are in that area.
Yes, on the other side of the North Hines, yes.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Todd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you just tell me about fish screens? Like if we keep the races open, do we need a fish screen? What's the story with those?
Yeah, so the council has a fish screening liability that exists for, 3 intakes, Pudding Hill, Methven Auxiliary and the Brothers. we're non-compliant currently, so we're overdue for putting them in. Council did a few months ago approve not doing any work on the Pudding Hill one because we're looking at a possible closure proposal there. But they've committed to, well, we've committed to detailed design of the fish screens for Brothers and the Methven Auxiliary. So at this point in time, the only commitment we've made to fish screens is the detailed design, and that was to basically give us something in order to develop some costs of construction.
So do we need a fish screen with this proposal or not?
Yes.
We do?
Yeah.
Okay. At what cost?
Well, again, the early figure I've used is 400 to 600,000.
Okay.
Yeah, I should clarify. So this race system is a very small subset of the wider network that intake supplies.
Thank you. Councillor Latham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just a little concerned about the vagueness of an alternative, or the cost of an alternative water supply. And I know because the recommendation was not to close it, we probably haven't gone too far down that track. But if we did decide on an alternative water supply, how do those costs lie? Where do they settle? Do they settle 50-50 with landowners and council? Do they all, is it all council? Is it, how does that normally happen?
Well, you would be in uncharted territory from one point of view. I think it would be up to council to decide. If council pays for it, somebody's got to pay for it. Council doesn't have any money of its own, obviously. So the question would be, who would we be sheeting those costs home to? And of course that raises the spectre of it being the users, or at least the Stockwater ratepayers as they currently exist.
Neil, did you just want to add to that?
Yeah, with other closures we have processed, the applicant has offered to pay for an alternative for people who don't have an alternative. So there are ways and means in which the applicant or people supporting the closure can contribute towards providing an alternative supply to those who don't have. I think that's been done historically, but in typically smaller schemes than what we're dealing with here.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. I just want to go back to the flooding aspect. I'll use a new word, a NIMBY, which is not in my backyard. So the person at the top of the race is duty bound not to let their floodwater go into the race, because that just carries on down to the next person, and so it goes on. That's correct, isn't it? You're not supposed to allow water to flow into the race runoff.
You're possibly getting into the bounds of the old Land Drainage Act, which is a fairly good piece of legislation, 1908 I think it is. It must be good, it's still around. And that basically talks about the laws of natural servitude. So people on low-lying land have to accept water from high-grade land. It's certainly not it's not permitted to concentrate water into a race, but overland flow will get it there anyway.
I just wanted to go back to a couple of questions that were raised from and one of them was about the council lease blocks and the affected parties. And Chrissy, I know you've got a definition there. I just thought it would be good if you could read that out for us, please.
So under our water race bylaw, under definitions, affected party is defined as in the context of an application to alter or close a section of race, the property owner or occupier who used that section of race or whose land the race channels run through or is adjacent to a roadside race.
Okay, thank you. And there was another question on the surface water strategy. Do you want to make any comments on that?
Yeah, so the surface water strategy is still progressing. There were many actions identified in the surface water strategy. Currently, our focus has been on land drainage. So we've been doing some modelling work, which we're waiting to receive the results of. And there's going to be some further work on that modelling around, so once we get our a district-wide model. The intention is then to overlay the Stockwater network onto that model. The purpose of this was to address some of the actions around identifying secondary flow paths and just trying to understand the true benefit of the network in relation to land drainage and stormwater. Haven't done too much in the way of, race rationalisation. Chrissy's team's been doing a sterling job just with dealing with applications as they've been coming through.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the officers? Councillor Lover.
Just heard from one submitter at the bottom about issues with flooding and stuff on her property. Who's responsible for the banks correction if they're starting to fail and all the silt build up? Is that the property owner, or does council have to pick up that tab of reconstruction and silt removal?
Yeah, so under the council policy, the local race is the landowner's responsibility to manage.
Mayor Brown.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I've got opposing views of listening to the submitters, and if you want to keep the race open, then you don't have any alternatives. If you want to close the race, want the race closed, then there is alternatives, which is contradictory to each other, which makes our job difficult. So for the ones who want to keep it open, have the staff investigated alternatives for them to see if there are any of the 9?
Well, again, I might have to defer to Chrissy on this, but the looking at alternatives was done at a desktop level with the discussion we've talked about previously.
Does that answer your question?
You finished.
Oh, Richard, can you just go off?
Sorry.
Yeah, and then.
Do the submitters agree with that desktop survey of the alternatives?
We haven't spoken individually with submitters. We've done as Andy said, we've done a desktop look at what possible options could be available. Wide across the entire area, not individual properties.
So was the reason for that is because the officers recommended that it should be declined, the application should be declined, so is that the reason? Yeah, it must be. Councillor Wilson.
I probably drawn what Mr Mayor was talking about. I feel this area is, as people will be aware, the Heinz-Yaka Water Trust is putting water into the Heinz River at the south of this to try and improve its water quality. We have Socols draining water into the ground from our water race network further down. There's a wider context than just leaving this one open or shut, so I'm concerned that if we turn it down and leave it open, that shuts the door on perhaps some further enhancement of the environment in that area. And if we shut it without respect of the people that have no water, we've made the wrong decision there. So I would implore that there's more research needs to be done on alternative water sources for the people, but in a wider context of if I use that word, or environmental benefits that could lead from it.
Thank you. Councillor Lovett.
I was going to just ask, if this water race stayed opened, would council be favourable to the property owners, the water race intercepts through the middle of their paddocks to alter the water race down fence lines and all the roadsides? Would you enable them for an easy progress to realign the water races?
We have a standard process now for alterations, and that is at the property owners, they apply to do it, and it's at their cost when it's a local race.
Great. Any further questions? Councillor Hooper.
Thank you. Just a quick one from me. Has the council done, I may have missed it, any testing of the race health-wise, water health-wise, or are they just relying on submitters?
No, we didn't do any water quality testing.
Right, okay, so I suppose we could, we've got the questions there. There's been a lot of questions, I suppose, on the alternatives. And Councillor Wilson made that point before. And this is why we're at the hearing, I suppose. And we don't have to make a decision today, but it would be good to get enough information if we could. We also have the water races bylaw, which sets, and we've got a link to that on page 4 of the agenda for today. So, Tony, do you want...
Thank you, through the chair. Look, so I mean, these questions were done pretty quickly at morning tea, so I apologise if I haven't quite got them on point. Picking up on the point of if council was of a mind to close this, you're going to have people, there will be properties that will be disadvantaged, so will need an alternative supply. And a council would perhaps need to consider whether they would be willing to support those people to get an alternative supply by helping them fund it or not. There's also further, picking up Councillor Wilson's point around further research and understanding that in greater detail, and if that's the direction you give us, then that's the work I guess we would go away and do as a team. We haven't gone there at this stage because under the bylaw and the standard operating procedure and the criteria, that's not a part of that thinking at this point, because otherwise we could go down rabbit holes and spend a lot of time. So we just try and keep quite mindful of that. If anyone does have the bylaw up, and I know you're all bedtime read it at night all the time, but if you go to Schedule 1, that talks about the criteria, and that's listed in the officer's report. So that's the criteria that we always come back to. That's been developed with a lot of consultation within the organisation and also with our key stakeholders. And so that's what guides our thinking. That's what guides our resolutions, our recommendations to you as the elected members. So if I haven't got the questions 100% correct, I apologise, but perhaps if you consider and debate whether option 1 is actually an option you want to consider as a council, and then that perhaps might guide you into questions 2 or 3.
Yeah, that sounds good, thank you. So we have a question up there. Are elected members prepared to pay for alternative water supplies for properties that need it? If so, how will this be paid for? I'll take the speakers for and against that. Councillor Cameron. Oh, you can ask a question, go for it. Oh, okay, we'll go back to Councillor Latham then.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that, with all due respects, that's the wrong question, because depending upon the decision we make, then we can decide who's going to pay for the alternative water supply if needed. So I think we're being led by the nose down the wrong track at this point in time.
Okay, I think that was put up there purely so that we would we were made aware of that point. Councillor Cameron, you had a question?
Around the who's going to pay for it.
Yep.
I think we need to know what are we paying for and what the, like we've told in excess of $50,000, but we don't actually know, is it $1 million or $350,000 or, like, we've got no clue.
Being led by the nose.
Yep.
That would be helpful to help me anyway, if that's the question we need to answer.
Okay. Do we need to go to question 2 or 3 first then? I'll go to Councillor Lovett.
I just had a question pertaining to this. I know the Waimak and the Hiranui have a district-wide water scheme, and that's for humans and animals and farm irrigation, whatever it is. It's all piped round systems. Could we have a bit of research in that to find out what it is cost them, who's paying, and that it's been in for years, and whether that gives us some guidelines where what we could follow?
Noted, yeah. Councillor Latham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Listening to all the submitters, and I congratulate them on the work they've done and the way they have presented them. My reading of the situation is that over recent years, as in all parts of our district, many farming practices have changed, and many of the farmers in that area have changed their farming practices. And I noticed Mr. Morrison's submissions that he's fenced off about 1,000 metres of his stock water races. I understand he did that voluntarily. There's also been a build-up of subdivisions in that area which alters water flows and such things. So as I say, all farming practices have changed. If we close the race, there will be certain people disadvantaged. If we leave the race open, it will be irritating for those who want it closed, but I'm not so sure that the disadvantage will be as great to those as to those who, if the race was closed. So I am going to say I'm in favour of affirming the council's original recommendation that the application to close the water race be declined.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron.
Have we referred to the rural fire service with regards to firefighting capacity and water availability and things as part of this research?
No, we haven't at this time.
It's in our recommendations that we consider that. I'm really not particularly skilled at considering that without knowing if we have it available.
So in our recommendations, or is that in the Schedule 1?
It's in the Schedule 1.
Yeah.
Criteria to be considered.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think in the end, we have a bylaw. Oh, sorry, Andy.
Yeah, just on that. So we've had anecdotal discussions with members of FENS for previous event, matters. Unless it's a main race with, many tens of litres of water, there's not a great deal of opportunity to use these smaller race systems. So the likelihood is that it would be of modest benefit.
No impact. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Yes, I feel we're being faced with an impossible decision because the right decision is to close the water race in the long term because that's where current farming practice is going and that builds into the, freshwater plans, all that in the long term. But in the short term, we have several submitters which have no water and so we need to be, I'm in favour of closure, but I feel that there is a lot of things going on in that area, in that space, in the water space. So, and we have a RDR offtake which is unauthorised, which we haven't further fully investigated. We have MAR going on at the Ashburton, at the Hines intake and through the council races, but we haven't fully investigated the other options. So I can't close it today, but I think it should be closed. So I feel, but I'm scared that once we say no to it, that puts it off the agenda for many years and we've actually embedded that piece of race in that network, which is not what I want to allow to happen. So I'd like further investigation of optionality around water supply.
Thank you. Good comment. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, and I support Councillor Wilson. I think today we have no option of what we have to do, and that's leave it open. But I think, given time, some of this problem will go away as these water streams grow throughout our district. And so how do we ensure that this proposal comes back to this table at some time in the future when we know there is an easier alternative, if you like, for water supply?
Andy?
Yeah, look, I don't know about how this would come back deliberately, but effectively declining an application one day doesn't mean it can't be reconsidered at any time in the future. And if the landowners that are seeking this race to be closed are motivated, and I think we've seen they are, then the moment an alternative comes available in this area, I'm sure this will be back in front of you.
Thank you. Mayor Brown.
Yeah, also agreeing with the two councillors over there, decline at this stage, but and I was just thinking before Mr Guthrie talked about a review in 18 months to see what has happened in the next 18 months, which a lot will happen. And if an alternative comes along, then we need to lift it up again and review it without going back to square one, but pick up where we left off and let the submitters for and against to try and work through a solution for them and come back and pick this up in 18 months. 18 months, and I'm plucking that out of the year, but it's a number I've put on. Come back in that period of time.
Thank you. I just want to ask a question of Chrissy. When was this application first received? So how long has it been? 6 months, a year? ongoing since this application's been
February
received?
this year.
February this
Because
year.
of the complexity of it, it takes a little bit longer to, it's not a simple, straight, easy process.
Okay, so say if we did review it in 18 months, that would be sort of around 2 years since the first application date, is that? Councillor Lovett.
Yes, yeah, I think we actually should put a time limit on this so it does come back. And in that meantime, I think officers need to do further research with the MAR project going forward and piping some of the district water. And I think as these small block holders, it should actually be written on their limbs on subdivisions up there, so we're not getting a whole lot more paddocks subdivided off into housing. They should know that there is water issues and, you know, going forward this water race will be closed. So we've got to really put a strict regime in place, otherwise it's just going to, you know, carry on for years and years. And no one's achieving anything. And I don't think it's fair to the big farmers having to bear the cost of a fish screen in the future, which they don't want. I mean, they don't want the water races. It's only the small ones at the end users. And we've got salt issue problems and culverts we hear, and I think there's a lot of work out there that needs to be put on the agenda and worked through.
Thank you. Right. Any other? Yes, Councillor Todd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To be fair, I probably need to be guided on this issue. Obviously, being a retailer in town, I don't have a lot of knowledge on on irrigation matters. So, but in just listening to everyone's comments today, it's probably fair to say that I do support the closure, but I just wonder what compensation or how we get around those who are going to be disadvantaged by it, and that's where, you know, if we come up with a figure that we can help those who are disadvantaged by the closure, then we go from there. But as I say, I'm new to this and I'll be guided by those with more knowledge than me.
Thank you, and that's also why we have the bylaw, because that it sets everything as well. Neil?
Yeah, if I can just repeat, historically council has not offered paid any money towards offering an alternative. So typically, as I said, we've had the people who are supporting the closure who have fronted with the costs. In this case, we've identified that it's huge, significant costs involved. And I would imagine the applicants or people supporting the closure would not be able to contribute or pay for all those costs, and they'd be looking to council to do it. So we have not done it before. This is a first for us to consider, if we were to consider that we do so, and that's something we have to deal with going forward. But at this stage, we have not done that. It's always rested on the people supporting the closure.
Thanks, Neil. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. If there's no further questions so that we can enter debate mode, I'm happy to move the recommendation as written.
So you don't want to have a review in there? Sorry, we'll just have, yeah.
I believe the applicants who, as Andy said, who asked for this to be closed will keep a close eye on what's happening in the area. And the moment water is freely available, won't be free, but available, I think we will see this come back to us. But I would also ask our officers to keep an eye on that as well.
Okay, so do we have
if someone's happy to move an amendment, I'm happy.
do we need to do a recommendation from this hearing to you, or is it just a show of hands like our other deliberations? How does it work, Tony, just to clarify?
Look, through the chair, I think what we should do, you give us a show of hands with where you're thinking as a collective group. Then with the report that comes back to you in the 21st of December, we'll pick up the themes that you've raised today, particularly around a review in the future. Okay, so I'll go to Councillor Cameron next. Just move your mic,
as an amendment to the recommendation, I don't think...
We're not doing a recommendation.
Oh, we're not doing a recommendation.
Right, so we're doing a show of hands.
Yep.
And then that will go to the report to council on the 21st of December, and then there will be a recommendation there and that will include a review, a possible review, and some background work on alternative water supplies, I guess.
Okay, so when it comes to council, it will have a timeline with the reviewer. I mean, I think we need to respect the submitters here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, through the chair. So we could do it either one of two ways. We could put a stake in the ground as an organisation and say we will look at this again in 2 years' time, or we could bounce the ball back into the applicant's court, who will be watching this closely anyway, as you've already raised. They can submit another application in the future at any point.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
There were some questions that we have asked that perhaps the council need to do some work on too. Is this review going to get the council to do that work as well? You know, we've identified a few issues that we'd like some knowledge on.
So that's to do with Councillor Wilson's points around the bigger picture and implications.
And all those criteria, there are a lot of criteria that weren't addressed in the report, you know, that we, in our policy. So will council look at those within a year or 18 months or whatever timeframe we put on that?
In terms of you want to review the criteria, or
No,
just in terms of the reporting back, we'll just improve
right.
that?
Yeah.
Yes, we'll take that on board. That will improve that in the future for any other.
Because I think we've all
Stockwater closures that come
identified
our
that
way.
there's gaps in our knowledge to make a reasonable, I think 2 years is too long as well.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick question. When is the bylaw to be reviewed, and the revenue and finance policy that's to be reviewed in 2023?
Through the chair. So the water races bylaw is up for review in September 2024.
Okay.
The long-term plan work starting now, but the revenue and financing policy, that will be coming back to council about September, October next year.
Yep.
To put in place any changes for 1 July 2024.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I have trouble supporting the closures not supporting the closures, so I'll get myself right around, if we don't have a review in place, because we need a fixed time of when it comes back, otherwise it will just be lost and submitters take a lot of effort, and it's obviously, for this community, could be quite decisive.
Yes.
So we don't want to let that, we want the council to take responsibility for it.
Yeah, I agree. And the mayor's suggested 18 months as a review. And I
agree with.
Yeah.
We need to, not 2 years. This has
No.
been going for just about a year now. So years past. 18 months need to come back. I think the answers for the solution to this problem is sitting at the back of the room. And I think the staff could, in the next, with less than 18 months, get a group of them from opposing and for, and let them work out what the solution is and bring that back to council in 18 months with their solution. Either they'll have a solution or they won't. But I think the solution sits at the end of the room there.
Thank you. Okay, so, Tony, did you want to add something? No. So, we're going to ignore those questions up there, or we're going to add to number 2, which was, does council support the application to close the water race with a review in 18 months' time?
With all these questions.
Wrong question.
Oh, sorry. Decline the application to close the water race with a review in 18 months' time. So can we have a show of hands who is happy with that? Councillor Cameron,
Can I
did
just
you
make
want
a wee
to?
amendment? The 18 months would be the maximum, and perhaps the group, the focus group or whatever needs to start convening and work towards a solution. So the maximum of 18 months, because bear in mind that would be 2.5 years, which is stressful and arduous for everybody. We have some sort of, decision.
Through the chair, Chrissy and I have just been having a wee sideline chat, and it would be fair to come back to you in February 2024, given that the application was made in February 22. So that gives it two years since the initial application, but that gives us just over 12 months to see if we can get an alternative in play.
Okay.
So,
Councillor Lover?
I totally agree with that, but while you're doing the review with the applicants, you're also doing some work on the MAR project and perhaps the cost of piping in the district and bringing back like the fish screen costs. We're going to have it all together. And I think, to me,
that will be something.
That's all ongoing anyway, and that's being reported by other mechanisms, and we have an update on our investigations with the Pudding Hill and our surface water strategy update. It's coming to council anyway, so that is underway.
And what the WIMEC's doing up there, their sort of costing, and, you know, that would be helpful to have all, you know, what other councils are doing. So
we can have a look at that as well. And
I think if that's the best solution, if we do all that.
Okay.
Yes, to Councillor Lovett, I think we need to focus on this water race here. The other thing she's talking about is all in the surface water strategy. So refresh yourself on the strategy, and I think you'll answer a lot of your questions.
Okay, so I'll go to a show of hands, and I'll get this right this time. Does council decline the application to close the Stockwater race with a review in February 2024? Show of hands. Yep, great, thank you. Is that enough information? You're happy with all that?
Thank you very much.
Do you want to explain any next steps so that people hear?
I'm probably just reiterating it again, sorry, but we'll come back to you on the 21st of December at your last council meeting for the year, and that's when you'll be able to make the decision in a formal setting.
Thank you. And for those who are here today, you will be able to watch, you're welcome to come in to that council meeting, but you can also watch it as it will be live streamed as well. Thank you all for your time today, especially those who have given up most of their morning to come in and submit. We really appreciate it. We have got our council meeting at 1 p.m, so we're free until then. Thank you very much.